This lecture for Module 5 is on information transparency and reporting by product manufacturers. You can see here all of the materials that go into making a car come from all over the world. So we need to know if these materials are harmful, how much are used in the car, how much waste gets produced from making this car, and what the company that makes the car is doing to reduce their impacts. So manufacturers do all kinds of greenwashing. This greenwashing is false or misleading environmental or health claims by product manufacturers. And these products all look very common to you. But the reality is they have all had lawsuits over false or misleading environmental or health claims, emissions performance of the truck, toxicity of the simple green cleaner, 100% sustainably sourced cocoa from Nestle is not sustainably sourced, and Tide plant-based detergent is not 100% plant-based as they claim. So all of these are greenwash. One study in 2009 found that 95% of environmental claims were false or misleading. But that's actually improved in the last 10 years because there are more environmental watchdog groups that are out there suing these companies for misleading claims. So remember our product life cycle. It's complicated because we have the phases: extraction, production, consumption, and waste. But in those phases, we have raw materials that go into those phases. We have energy that go into those phases. We have transportation between the phases, and we have emissions resulting from each of the processes. So the environmental impacts and health impacts of a product are complicated. So how can we know what these impacts are? How can companies give us the truth and the data for us to make good decisions about products? So there's a concept in manufacturing and producing called extended producer responsibility. There are several concepts that relate to extended producer responsibility. This is a very popular concept in Europe, less popular here, as you'll see on the next slide. The first concept is called the precautionary principle, and it basically says that we shouldn't wait for proof of harm of a toxic material or constituent. We shouldn't wait till it gets proved harmful. Instead, if we suspect that the constituent or component might be harmful, we shouldn't use it until we prove it's safe. So that's the precautionary principle. And here are a couple illustrations of the precautionary principle. Asbestos, for example, it was first found to cause asbestosis, which was diseases and cancer of the lungs, in 1926, but it was still used for decades after that. It was regulated in 1986. In other words, the amount of asbestos allowable in building products was regulated starting in 1986. But this material is still being removed from buildings. CCA treated lumber was first found to be harmful in 1960. The A stands for arsenate, which is a form of arsenic. Kids were playing on play structures with CCA treated lumber. They were finding traces of arsenic on the hands of these kids. EPA recognized the harm in 1984, but it was not phased out until 2003. The last example are PVC products. The most common probably might be your shower curtain, but also there's PVC piping, et cetera. There's harm with the vinyl chloride. PVC stands for polyvinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride harm in PVC plastic was first found to be harmful in the 90s. Now, vinyl chloride was used as a chemical weapon in World War I, so we knew the problems with it, but it wasn't acknowledged that there were problems with it in products until the 90s. the ATSDR, which is a US health agency, released a statement in 2006 about the harm of vinyl chloride products, and it is still in use today. But as you'll see, corporations are starting to phase it out. So we can't always count on our government to phase things out. We have to maybe rely on our corporations as well. So another concept is the polluter pays principle. This is where polluters pay taxes or penalties for polluting things. So there is a packaging tax in Europe, where if you don't bring your grocery bag, your reusable grocery bags to the grocery store, you have to pay for bags. That's also a tax in certain parts of the US as well. The US has a gas guzzler tax. Humvees and other gas guzzling vehicles actually have to pay a tax when you buy the vehicle. So that gets transferred to the consumer. The Superfund law requires industrial polluters to pay for the cleanup, but unfortunately, many corporations that pollute actually declare bankruptcy to get out of paying for the cleanup, and so that cost is transferred to the taxpayers. But that's called the polluter pays principle. And if the polluter has to pay, then industries may clean up their act a little bit. Another concept of extended producer responsibility is product take back and disposal. A product take back program that I just participated in was turning in my old iPhone for a new one. I got $700 toward my iPhone 12, so I'm feeling pretty good about that by just turning in my iPhone 8. I don't get iPhones, or I don't get new phones very often. That is product take back, and what happens is that the company will extract any recyclable elements and safely dispose of the elements that aren't recyclable. So this is a great concept. It is not something that is required in the US. It is required in certain European countries. In the US, it's a voluntary thing, but as you'll see in a few minutes, Apple is pretty green. So the last concept of extended producer responsibility is called product transparency, and we're going to talk most about this today. This is the idea that producers and manufacturers should provide comprehensive, accurate, and verifiable information about their products and their practices. So for instance, like we have a nutrition label for food, which you can see here, we also should have a nutrition label for the environmental and social impacts of the products that we buy. This is a Declare label from the International Living Future Institute for a toilet. It shows where it's made, what its life expectancy is, what its end-of-life options are, the ingredients that are in it, and it highlights in orange the ingredients that could be harmful to human health. Note polyvinyl chloride. And then it also talks about whether it goes through the Living Building Challenge or the Living Product Challenge, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the first type of producer transparency is corporate sustainability reporting. This is the cover and first page of the Apple Environmental Progress Report, which is essentially the corporate sustainability report for 2021. It's looking at the 2020 year. And just, I'm going to use this as a model to show you the kinds of things that corporations might report on and how they might report that data. This is about I think it's a 120-page report. I'm not going to obviously go through the whole thing, but I'm going to show you some things. So they start out with some report highlights. For instance, they're saying that they have been carbon neutral for corporate operations. That means their corporate offices since April 2020. Of course, carbon neutral means that they either buy carbon offsets or they plant trees or they use renewable energy. And it's probably some combination of all of those things that is detailed in the report. with numbers, etc. They say 40% of all material in the MacBook Air comes from recycled sources. And this chart on the right shows Apple's carbon footprint, and it shows in green that product manufacturing, including resources, is their biggest carbon footprint, and product transport is up there. Companies will oftentimes show report highlights, whatever they've been doing really well. So for instance, 100% renewable energy sourced for all Apple facilities, 100 plus suppliers committed to renewable electricity, 99% recycled tungsten, which is a resource and intensive material and has toxicity issues as well. So using recycled tungsten is a good thing. 40% of all material in the MacBook Air comes from recycled sources, etc. So these are report highlights that they have at the beginning. They also show a kind of a breakdown of what their carbon footprint is in the beginning of the report. They back these claims up with real detail and numbers in the back of the report. Having a circular supply chain is a priority of Apple, and it really should be a priority of any of the products that we use or specify. For Apple, they look at a circular supply chain as having to do with 4 areas: sourcing of materials, efficiency of material use, longevity of their products, and recovery of materials for reuse. So that's the product take-back idea. Apple has been sued over longevity or lack thereof of some of their products. For instance, I can remember a lawsuit where it was found that with updates to iPhones, they were actually reducing the battery life and the functionality of the iPhones in order to get people to buy new iPhones. So there's, I think, trying to live that down, hopefully trying to improve and move beyond that bad practice. We don't know for sure whether they have or not yet. So they're showing us the reduced carbon footprint of their manufacturing over time, and they're showing us goals here and actual performance here with more information in the appendix of the report. Energy efficiency of a product or material is important on 2 fronts: the manufacturing energy that gets used and the energy efficiency of the products if the product uses energy. Apple has both cases, of course. I think one thing that's important to note is that by greening their practices and really quantifying their sustainability claims, Apple is influencing the entire supply chain of suppliers that supply components of their electronics. So not only are they practicing pretty decent environmental practices, but they're influencing hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers toward green practices. So these big corporations like Apple, Microsoft, Ford, etc., can influence industry in substantial ways, perhaps more important than our government regulations. Apple is also showing that improvements that they've made to materials. They're using 100% recycled aluminum. They are recycling cobalt year after year, reducing the copper needed because that has such a huge environmental footprint, etc. So that's just a selection of their material improvements that they're showing in their corporate sustainability report. They are talking a lot about all the practices and materials that are 100% recycled. But it's important to note that in a recycled product or a recycled material, it could be pre-consumer recycled. So in other words, it's a waste product from an industrial process that never sees the consumer. So the thinking is that waste products from industrial processes should be easily reused by the same industry, or they should be sold or given to other industries. And so that's not quite as valuable a recycling as a post-consumer recycled content, where, for instance, with 100% recycled aluminum, it's best if it's post-consumer. You drink out of the beer can, you recycle it, it goes into your new MacBook Air. That is 100%, or that's post-consumer recycled content. Packaging is a huge thing because packaging is only in the use phase for a very short time, and it becomes waste within, you know, a week or a month. So the resource use of packaging is quite substantial. So that evidently Apple is working on reducing the use of plastic in packaging. You can see here using more recycled fiber in packaging and using more responsibly sourced virgin fiber. Recycled fiber is recycled paper or cardboard, and this is responsibly sourced paper or cardboard. Product longevity is a huge issue. It has been a huge issue for Apple, and there is a term called planned obsolescence. This is where manufacturers actually plan for their product to fail after a certain amount of time. This is the lawsuit against Apple that happened with the iPhone, is that they were accused of planned obsolescence, and hopefully they've shaped up their act. That remains to be seen. Product take back and recycling and recovery is huge, especially in the electronics industry, because a lot of the electronics components have toxicity issues, as well as they're valuable metals or chemicals that can be recycled safely. Water conservation is treated in the Apple sustainability report rather lightly. This is talking about water use at corporate facilities. They don't talk about water use in manufacturing, which I think is a big problem. And they probably don't talk about it because they probably are not performing very well in this area. Safer chemistry is a huge aspect of corporate sustainability reporting. Here, they're saying that in all phases, product design and innovation, manufacturing, product use, and recovery, they are designing for safer chemistry. They're designing for safer chemistry in their material selection, not as much in their manufacturing, but more in their product use. Safer chemistry in their RSS and biocompatibility testing, use of safer cleaners, designing environmentally preferred materials. Sorry about that. And then in the manufacturing, they're doing supply chain data collection. So you got to probably read the fine print on this one to really know if they're employing use of safer chemicals and metals and constituents, but they do show in their report that their 30-year history of smarter chemistry, and you can see here right at the top, they have phased out PVC. That's great news. And they're using other kinds of thermoplastics, which are less harmful to human health. They have eliminated brominated flame retardants. They have eliminated mercury in 2009, lead in 2006, arsenic in 2008, beryllium is eliminated from all new product designs. So they are definitely taking steps in the right direction. Okay, so that's kind of the full gamut of all the things that product manufacturers should be thinking about and reporting on, and reporting detail on. But the question is, how can we know if they're telling the truth? Well, there are corporate watchdogs that are watching Apple very, very carefully. So Apple cannot lie as easily as some other more obscure corporations. But Apple did take the step in their report to have a company from the outside verify their data and provide what's called an independent assurance statement. Now, Apple did pay for this verification. So this company would want to keep their client happy, but they would also want to protect their reputation as really verifying data. So there's a little bit of a check and balance there, but not as much as one would think. So we're going to talk about ways that they obtain the data and the ways that that the data can be presented to you in other forms other than a corporate sustainability report. Because as you saw in some of the images, the corporate sustainability report is very general about, it doesn't talk in detail about any one product. It talks about kind of the suite of Apple products and their manufacturing practices. So the way that we get information about one product, anything from a water bottle to a car, a particular model of, the F-150 pickup, is through a life cycle assessment. And this is a systematic analysis of the environmental impacts of products or services during their entire life cycle. So you've seen this graphic a couple times now, but when you look at a life cycle assessment, you need to account for all the inputs. In other words, the raw inputs are the raw materials and the energy, and all the outputs, which are the product or the emissions, and all the transportation that happens through the entire life cycle, from what's called cradle, which is extraction, to gate, which is where to grave, which is where the product is finished with its use. So it either becomes waste, or in a better world, it gets recycled or reused or recovered in some way. So that's a pretty big accounting of all of these impacts. I can't do it. You probably can't do it unless you're a professional life cycle analyst. But professionals do it. And there is a profession called a life cycle analyst, and generally they have a science background, probably a chemistry background, as well as a systems analysis experience. So essentially, this is another chart showing what I just showed you, where it's showing the phases of the life cycle assessment and the inputs, which are energy, water, or raw materials, and the outputs, which could be the usable product. It could be waste to the water, waste to the air, solid wastes, or other environmental releases. So this is very complicated. And it's important to note that some life cycle assessments will only look at something called cradle to gate, which is raw materials acquisition, manufacturing, processing, and formulation. And that's it. That's the gate of the manufacturing facility. So you have all these other impacts that are not accounted for. So if you can look for life cycle assessment information that is cradle to grave rather than cradle to gate, that is best. So that is called the system boundary. And the system boundary, this is broken down with even more information: raw material, transport, manufacturing, transport, assembly, use of the product, maintenance of the product, repair of the product, possible replacement or refurbishment, operational energy. It means while the product is in use, energy used, water while the project is in use, end of life phase, which is deconstruction, energy and waste, demolition, transportation, waste processing, disposal, and either reuse, recovery, recycle, etc. So this is called a system boundary. So you can start to see how complicated life cycle assessments are. here's a life cycle assessment for carpet. This is the system boundary for the carpet. So this carpet has different components. It has the yarn, which has both post-consumer recycled nylon and pre-consumer recycled nylon. It has backing. It has a coating on the backing. It has a stabilization layer and a secondary backing. And these are all the materials that go into it. And this is the mass. So you can see the largest component of carpet is the secondary backing, which is pre-consumer calcium alumina glass. If you really add up all the nylon, that's probably second. And then the recycled limestone in the pre-coat backing is another large component of carpeting. It's complicated, right? So here are some results. And these numbers, or these letters and numbers, refer to the life cycle phase of the system boundary. So A is manufacturing, B is, I can't remember, we'll have to go back. So A is raw materials and manufacturing, transport to the gate. B is the use phase. C is the end of life phase. Okay, so this life cycle assessment only goes through the end of life phase, but not the reuse phase. And all these numbers are probably like a foreign language to you, but this one stands for global warming potential. And this is in kilograms of CO2 equivalents. All of these are other abbreviations that have to do with environmental impacts. And it's all Greek to me, as they say. So this is why we don't do life cycle assessments, but there is a product out there called the Environmental Product Declaration, EPD. And this is essentially a document that is made for consumers. In this case, these are two documents that are made for consumers of carpet, and they contain the life cycle assessment data that I just showed you, but they contain it in a more easily digestible way. And theoretically, you can take this EPD for the Mohawk group, modular carpet tiles, and compare it to the Interface America's modular carpet tiles. And if the numbers, if you have the same comparison of the same amount of carpet, a square foot of carpet, you can compare these two and how they perform environmentally. What often happens, though, is that one will do the numbers for a square yard and the other one will do the numbers for a square foot, and then you have to do math, and it's just a little too complicated. But environmental product declarations are in consumer language as opposed to scientist language. So here you are. Global warming potential again. Global warming potential. Well, it's still hard to compare because it looks like this has much worse global warming potential than this, but the unit, like I said, the units may not be the same. So theoretically, you can compare these, but it's challenging even with environmental product declarations. It's also important to note that environmental product declarations could be put out by the company, and they could be full of lies or full of false data. And the only way that you know if they're certified by a third party is if they have a third party logo that says that they have been verified by a third party. So here are some companies that do neutral third party verification of data collection methods and results. So we're not going to talk about all these, but we are going to talk about cradle to cradle certification because they certify products. In this case, they're certifying this porch swing. Actually, they're certifying the outdoor furniture from Lal Designs, and they make porch swings, they make modern outdoor furniture. And they have been they have put their product line through a transparency process that is approved by Cradle to Cradle certification. You'll watch a TED Talk in this module by one of the two founders of the Cradle to Cradle certification. So they're a pretty high standard, and they certify products or product lines for these criteria: material health, in other words, the health impacts of the material reutilization, the resource efficiency of the material, renewable energy in manufacturing, water stewardship in manufacturing, and social fairness in manufacturing. In other words, does the manufacturer pay a fair wage? Do they hire hire a diverse workforce, and do they treat them equitably and responsibly? So this is Cradle to Cradle certification. And the last certification that I want to talk about is called the Living Product Challenge. This is a certification by the International Living Future Institute, and we'll be talking about the Living Building Challenge in another module. But the Living Product Challenge has standards for products, and some have to do with restoring environments where excavation of materials happens, with the water balance and balancing the water use in manufacturing and of the product, reducing or getting to zero energy use in manufacturing processes. In other words, using renewable energy sources, optimizing the health of the product, optimizing a circular and regenerative approach to resource use, having a just and equitable treatment of the workforce, and of course, they throw in beauty, which is nice. Is it a nice looking product? So these are all standards that the Living Product Challenge requires. And here you can see this product, which is a chair, got fully certified by the Living Product Challenge, 20 out of 20 possible score in reducing their carbon impact, water impact, energy impact, waste impact, place, restoring the habitat, equity, and beauty. So this is a living product label. Remember our Declare label that we saw at the beginning? The Declare label is part of the Living Product Challenge. So it is possible to get partially certified. So you can see this is called petal certified. So this aluminum louver shade structure is certified with respect to energy, but not certified with respect to some of these other items. Okay, so what do you look for from product manufacturers when we're talking about information transparency? Of course, we want to look for improved sustainability practices and sustainability performance of the products. We want to look for information transparency. We want to look for data and quantities of impacts, not just vague claims. Don't look for something that says recycled content. Look for something that says 95% post-consumer recycled content. And then lastly, we want to look for third-party verification of the claims. Is it a certified product? Is it certified by one of the companies that was in a previous slide? Because companies can say anything, they can greenwash anything, but if they're not verified third party, then you can't necessarily completely believe their claims. Thank you.